It's a great pleasure to have today Thomas Sales from Bordeaux. He was yesterday in the PhD jury of Philippe Moudouk. Thomas has an interesting career already. He did a PhD on cold atoms and even experimental, I think. But then he turned mainly to theory and worked at the ESPCI in the soft matter group with Elie Raphael. And he collaborated a lot with the Canadian group around Caridino-Queveres to study thin films and the relaxation of steps. And he developed the continuum theory to interpret the time evolution of these viscocapillary effects. And since 4 years now, he moved to Bordeaux, where he's in the soft matter group at the LOMA, and where he tries to develop some topics around diffusion and biophysics. And we are looking forward to your talk today. Yep.
Thank you, Henrik. And good morning, everyone. So am I allowed to remove the mask? Yes? Don't mind? Thanks. All right, so thanks again for the invitation. I must say it's my first time at the Institut Charles Sadran, and I'm very happy so far. Discovered very interesting things in the PhD thesis and also in the lab, so thanks for that. And as Henrik explained, I would like to tell you about a new field I'm working in and I'm trying to develop here, which is at the boundary between softness and viscous flows. So I'd like to convey the idea that mixing soft boundaries with somehow boring viscous flows might lead to things that are not simply the sum of the two ingredients, but sometimes qualitatively different behaviors. And that's what I would like to show you today. And perhaps at the end of the talk, I hope you will be able to understand why I've put those two images together. All right, so before I start, let me just present my lab. So I come from LOMA at the University of Bordeaux and CNRS, which is a kind of recent lab, but at the same time, a pretty old one. So the name has changed 7 years ago. It has been reassembled in terms of people working in. And there is a new building since 5 years now. So it's basically a small department of physics. We deal there with 3 types of topics. Photonics and materials is one historical group. There is an experimental team about soft matter and biophysics. And there is also a condensed matter theory team where I belong to. And this team has been assembled by David Dean, who's here in the middle. So he came from Toulouse and basically he attracted a lot of researchers to work with him on statistical physics, both at the quantum level, but also with H bar equals to 0. So there is a soft matter and hydrodynamics component. You might know in particular Thomas Biquet, who was there last week, I think, for a PhD thesis. All right, and as far as I'm concerned, so I'm part of this theory group, and I have my own little team, which is called the Emmett Brown group, like the famous scientist in Retour vers le futur, Back to the Future. So what we do is to do some theory, experiment, and numerics broadly with several collaborators. And we deal with problems at several scales. So we range typically from the big scale with wakes that you can observe at the back of boats sailing on the ocean, but also at the back of AFM tips that are moving near polymer fields. Okay? We are interested in soft lubrication, but I will dedicate the talk to that part. We are also discussing and working a lot about friction in very complex assemblies where you have several objects intertwined with each other. So you might have heard about this popular enigma of putting 2 phone books together and pulling on those and being able to lift up a car with these. But there are other systems. Think about granular chains. You can take those granular chains that you find in the thick sink of your bathroom, for instance, assemble them like polymer melts and pull on them or push on them. And they have very intricate frictional properties due to the topology there. We are working also on the elastocapillary features. And in particular, on that image, you see a little fiber that is micrometric, that is winding around a droplet. And what we can do there is to evaporate the droplet, and you're left off with a kind of a coil. And if you have the good material, you can pass current in it. And so it's a little magnetic coil. Okay. And so we've developed a startup on those ideas because it's actually very interesting to have those mesoscale self-assembled features. We work a lot about polymer nanofilms, which was the topic of yesterday in particular. In the point of view of their nanorheology, what's the behavior of the flow of those very small confined objects when their thicknesses become comparable to the inner objects, the macromolecule. Okay, so we are in a quasi 2D situation, and artifacts or new effects might occur there. We work in microfluidics and microshells, so assembly of polymer layers in order to create cargo protected kind of systems. You have heard about that, I'm sure. But we study the rheology and the hydrodynamics of those systems in microfluidics. We are interested in the capillarity of soft, very soft gels, kilopascal-like in modulus, for which the capillarity is playing a major role over elasticity. And for those systems, there are more and more controversies associated with the fact that, for instance, people have reported strange effects. You can, for instance, increase the surface tension of those gels by simply pulling on them. So there is a coupling between mechanics and surface tensions there. And this is debated, so there are a lot of work on here. Here with Hendrik, York, and also with Tony Maggs at TSPCI, we are also interested in polymer films that are confined, but from the point of view of molecular dynamics. And thanks to the work of Hendrik in particular, we are getting results closer and closer to the TG there. And finally, I also work a bit on the topic of the glass transition, but from the point of view of statistical physics, I'm trying to create very simple toy models and not big theories for it. All right, but today I'd like to tell you a story about soft lubrication and the developments around that. And the main idea started when we discussed with Ma about dramatic events that you can see on those images that are called landslides. You have an example with snow on the left, but mainly the other ones are avalanches of ground and mud that are generated after big events of rain. So we don't know very much about the cause of those effects, apart from the rain. But what we know is the structure of the soil. Typically, often those events happen on tilted slopes, so mountains. And so you have the water from the big rain events that enter into the soil, and there is a kind of Darcy flow. Okay, so you have the water tending to go down towards the bottom by gravity. But the layer is structured in several layers, actually, that are poroelastic and that have different permeabilities. Okay, and so at some point you reach an impermeable layer, which is essentially clay, which is impermeable to water, which means that the water will at some point stop and start to create patches and puddles that can connect with each other. And at some point, some percolation event generates an immense avalanche based on a tiny fluctuation. But the main feature we like here is the fact that basically you have confined viscous flows, okay, in rocks, and that those soils, they are poroelastic. They are porous and sometimes deformable. Okay, let me go down further in scale and think about our joints. Mammalians, we all have those joints, famous objects, right? Some of us suffer from those when they age. Bones are rigid objects. So if they were in dry contact, this would be a nightmare. Very painful. This is what happens in arthrosis, for instance. However, there is luckily a lubricant, which is called synovia, which is a fluid in between that allows you to have smooth and low friction between your bones. And in addition to that, there is a layer here, which is called cartilage, which is a poroelastic gel that participates into the process in an unknown fashion, I must say. But what we know about those cartilages is that the friction coefficient of your joint is typically 10⁻⁶. I mean, it's the best frictionless system you can even dream of building. Okay, but we don't understand why the coefficient is so low. And more people are believing that the role of cartilage is crucial and that perhaps the elasticity of cartilage plays a role. So you see where I'm going. Again, a soft boundary, viscous flow, and perhaps some key ingredients to find here. Okay, and this cartilage is actually everywhere. You can think about roller bearings. It's another type of joint. You have fastly moving objects, beds or cylinders into those motors, and they are basically lubricated by oil, which is a thermoviscous and piezoviscous liquid. And so you generate very high pressures in those components. And those pressures, they are actually able to deform the metal. So there is damaging over years. And this is a bad news for motors and big machines in industry, right? again, another type of roller bearing, if you want, the famous aquaplaning. You have a soft tire tire of a car that is in contact with a wet road. And again, the pressure in this very viscous layer of water, because water is viscous at those tiny scales, will push on the soft tire, and you might have dramatic impacts. Here is an example at even smaller scale that I like very much. So it comes from a work at MIT. This is a microfluidic channel, okay? But instead of being a standard microfluidic channel, it's placed on an antenna, so it's vibrating. It has a certain resonance frequency related to stiffness of the material and the mass inside. Now what they do is to push with some difference of pressure a particle, being a droplet or a cell inside, and this particle just goes inside the tip. And when the particle enters the system, the mass of the system is increasing, okay? And so you're changing the resonance frequency. You are shifting it towards lower values, which you can see here. The frequency is suddenly decaying, okay? And at the end of the antenna, there is a constriction that blocks the passage of the particle. And during a certain time, the particle is blocked. When it's able to sneak in and escape, again, you recover the bare frequency. So you see, from this simple experiment, what you can measure is at the same time the change of mass by this decay and the deformability by this time. Okay, and so you can plot a finger tip print, a map of your population of cells, for instance, where you have the deformability in a sense versus the volume or the size. This is interesting because now you can have sane and insane populations and perhaps have different slopes there. And so you can perhaps characterize some disease in situ in microfluidics without touching the system, without invading just by taking some cells from the blood. So I find it very interesting. And again, as you see from this image, what we have is a deformable object in a very confined viscous environment. Okay. Yes. Like this. So here is another example from the blood now. There is this famous disease, anemia, where your red blood cells that take croissant-like shape, so they deform, and they can even clog the vessels, which can be pretty dramatic for the arteria, for instance. Well, the list is infinite. I will stop here. I just wanted to give you a flavor that soft and confined viscous flows are everywhere in nature on a broad range of scales. And thus, in view of this constat, we wanted to kind of build up an harmonic oscillator for that problem, having soft boundaries and viscous flows to generate the qualitative features that are essential to these types of problems. So the main idea is the following. Let's first now take a sphere. It's a rigid object in green here, and we place it in a viscous fluid around, okay? This object is driven by external forces, gravity if it's big, or difference of pressure in a microfluidic chamber, for instance. So it can go down. But as it goes down, it's expelling the fluid below, so it generates a flow. And if you have a wall nearby, well, that flow will be associated with boundary conditions, no slip, typically. And so you will generate huge gradient of velocity in the contact. Okay, you have to expel a lot of fluid, but you cannot move at the substrate or at the particle. And so big gradient of velocity in hydrodynamics means immediately stresses, hydrodynamic stresses. And from Stokes' equation, you know that you have also pressure associated to the stress. So they use a huge pressure. And you all know that because you've played frisbee. And when the frisbee is falling down by free fall, at some point it slows down infinitely, right? And this is due to the fact that it's harder and harder to expel fluid and that there is a pressure associated to that. All right, fair enough, this is well known. But now if the wall is deformable, well, that pressure can also push on the ground and so deform it. Then you reopen the gap, so less friction. So you modify the behavior of the particle and the trajectory, which means that now the particle is not a single object. It's dressed, coupled to the presence of the boundary, and you can think of the system as a whole now, and you should do that. So how to treat that problem? Well, we will rely on what has been done by Stokes in 3D in the bulk. So you have a sphere, which is moving at a constant velocity in a certain viscous fluid, and the sphere has a certain radius r. What we do typically is to calculate the line of currents, the velocity field. You can derive it, get the gradients, get the pressure, and you can integrate everything at the surface of the particle. And that's how you generate the force in total exerted on the particle. And the celebrated formula is proportional to the viscosity of the fluid here, in this case, proportional to the velocity, but strangely proportional to the size and not the surface of the object. Okay. All right, so we do exactly the same, but we do that near a wall. That's the first modification. And for simplicity here, I place myself in 2D, and I will avoid any dimension. So I will place myself in a dimensional world, non-dimensional world with gravity equals to -1. Okay? There is one variable in that problem, which is the distance between the particle and the wall. Okay, capital delta, and capital T is time. Okay, so it will move over time. There is only one dimensionless parameter now, which is the ratio between the driving and the damping, or the reverse, viscosity and gravity. And so I can compute exactly with this argument, I can compute the force exerted on the particle and branch it into Newton's law. Okay, so the force is proportional to the viscosity, like Stokes, proportional to the velocity again. But now you see there is a strange denominator, which is just a signature of the fact that you have a rigid wall below. And so you are replacing half of the world by an infinitely viscous fluid in a sense. And as such, you must have an exploding effective viscosity for your force. That is why when delta goes to 0, the dissipation is humongous. Okay, and the power law here is just a signature of the fact that we are in 2D. It would be different in other dimensions. Okay. Okay, so I have this viscous damping. I have gravity. In my units, it's 1 or -1, but I put everything on the left. And you have inertia due to the Newton's law. Okay, this is a very old problem, in fact. This has been studied in the 60s by Brenner. This is a very well-known situation. What I would like to modify now is to add softness to the wall. So there are many ways to do that, and we tried all of them, of course. But here, the simple picture I would like to give you is a very simple elastic material, just to fix the ideas. Let's assume it's an assembly of independent springs. Okay, it's a Euclidean mattress, and you have just the response locally, the deformation, which is directly proportional to the pressure field. Okay, this is not realistic. In general, you have convolutions, and it's a non-local process with incompressible materials, right? But let's just assume that, and it's pretty fair because it's linear, and the response is linear. And also in Fourier space, it's always like that. If you have a convolution in Fourier space, it's a product. So in terms of scaling, you get the good idea here. Okay, we can do more realistic situations. So I just introduced a new parameter, which says that the deformation is proportional to the pressure, and that parameter is the dimensionless compliance, the inverse of your Young modulus in my units. Okay, and I redo exact same machinery, but with no boundary conditions changing. So I end up with a new term in Newton's equation, and at leading order in the compliance, it's proportional linearly to kappa. And don't look at the details. We don't want to enter the details of those equations, but it's just very nonlinear. You see the square here and the power laws. It's very singular because you have vanishing denominators. And also you have even an acceleration-like term, which is not intuitive for a force. Okay, it's a beast. Let's forget about the details apart from that. And since we... Can you say that again?
Just what means kappa? Is kappa equal to 0, meaning very soft, soft thing, or kappa?
When kappa is 0, your system is rigid. So that you kill that term and you recover the previous case. So it's the dimensionless compliance or softness, or it's the inverse of a Young modulus or rigidity. Okay. Okay, so initially we were interested in landslides and system with more degrees of freedom. So just we increased a bit the degrees of freedom of our system by allowing for more variables. So instead of only sedimenting, the particle is also allowed to slide and to roll. Okay, so we have 2 more variables: the position of the center of mass, xg, along the slope, and the angle. And we have this deformation. All right, so believe me that in 3D, it's exactly the same. With 3 variables, you have exactly the same structure. You don't have to look at the details of that. But what we have is, again, the same structure. Inertia will be given by all the forces. This is Newton's law, or momentum conservation. First, you have viscosity on the left, which is always proportional to the velocity and the viscosity. So it's expected. You have gravity with a cosine and a sine because we are tilting the wall. And also there is no torque contribution to gravity due to the alignment with the center of mass, okay? And so you have the main feature of softness, which is this linear term in front. It's a matrix that couples all the variables. So without looking at the details of that, you immediately realize that you have a very complex object here, 3 variables, 4 dimensionless parameters that are controlling the system. And the equation is a so-called Pain-Levé equation. It is very nonlinear and with diverging stuff or vanishing masses. you can put that on the other side, the acceleration term, and you see that sometimes the mass can vanish, which is like, you know, a rocket. Okay, so this is very interesting for a viscous system. What are the features of that? You can code that equation and solve and look for phase space of solutions. I mean, it's a very large phase space, as I told you, but there are interesting behaviors. So here are 3 examples among others. What you can see sometimes, depending on the initial condition, you can see that the particle oscillates near the wall. So you are in a very low Reynolds number world, but you can make particle oscillate. You can backspin the particle, so provide a cut, a slice, whatever you call it in tennis, for instance, where you have a back spin of the bed, and then it will lift off away from the wall. So you can generate Magnus-like effects at 0 Reynolds numbers. Yeah. You can also have, like, for those of you who play pool, effet rétro or draw shot effect. You can really make the particle come back. It's in the fluid though. It's more like a boomerang, but you can have this feature despite that there is no inertia in the fluid. Okay, that's the key message. It seems that soft boundaries allowed you to put back some inertial-like feature in your system. All right, so we decided to test those ideas first at the macro scale. And this is done by Baudouin Saint-Yves, a collaborator of mine. This is an aquarium. It's 1 meter cube, typically, so 1 by 1 by 1 meter. There is a slope in the middle that is covered by a soft layer of either a gel or an elastomer. Okay, and then we take a cylinder and let the cylinder fall under the influence of gravity. Okay, so it will fall down the slope, and from the side we record the motion of the cylinder. And we can also record the deformation of the wall thanks to fluorescent particles that are embedded at the free surface. Okay, so you also have the deformation, and everything finally is embedded into a silicone oil, very viscous fluid. All right. So what do we see? So you have a video here with 2 actually experiments, so 2 videos that are made into a composite one, where we see a fast motion and a slow motion. Okay? And in one case, there is a rigid bare substrate, and in the other case, you have a soft layer on top of it. Okay, so who thinks that the fast one is on a soft substrate in the audience? Any guess? Yes, 1. And the opposite case, I guess everyone else. Okay. So the answer is that the first one is on a soft substrate, which is very counterintuitive. It's very counterintuitive because you could imagine that you are embedded in kind of soft material, and so you have more friction and you have to deform, so you have to pay viscoelastic costs and so on. In fact, it's the opposite. The slow particle is on a rigid substrate and is actually experiencing stick slip. So it's just frictionally moving with that type of chaotic or hectic motion. And the soft particle goes fast. Of course, we can quantify that. We can change the softness of the material or the thickness of it, which is equivalent somehow to increase the compliance. Okay, if you have a very thick material, it's pretty soft compared to a very thin where you feel the boundary conditions. Okay. So by increasing the softness, you see that you increase the velocity. Yes? Mm-hmm.
The fact that it's a mixture of different chains, can I treat it as people do it?
Okay, so that's a refinement of, for me, so far, PDMS, when it's cross-linked, is a simple Young modulus and a simple Poisson ratio, and viscosity is a constant number, okay? But you're perfectly right that there are refinements to that. I just want to give you the first order picture where it's sufficient to treat this, okay? You have to remember that compared to motor industry, the speeds here are super slow. I mean, you see the cylinder, right?
You cannot
you can also, we did that as well. So you can change. Same for the substrate. We change. We not only use the silicone substrate, but stiffer ones. Yeah, that's correct. But just to be sure, there is no piezo-viscous or thermo-viscous effect in those oils because we are not in a motor. It's not 1,000 turn I mean, pi per minute, right? It's super. Okay.
So there is no inertia in this experiment.
No.
So the question you showed before are general in this case.
Yes, exactly. All right, so so I was showing you that if you increase the compliance or the thickness of the material, you have a larger velocity, but also it's more uniform. I mean, it's more stable. It's a steady sliding instead of the chaotic one that you see for rigid objects. Okay, so the softer the material, the faster you slide, strangely. So this behavior is actually rooted in the big matrix I showed you before. It's one of the particular components that you can find in this huge space of solution. But I would like to give you a flavor of that because, in fact, that sliding motion was already present in previous works. It's actually rather old. In the 90s, there is a work by Sekimoto and Meidler about that. You also have works by François Lequeux, I guess, on that problem. The main idea is the following. It's a theoretical prediction at that time. The sphere is now moving along the substrate with a certain velocity v, and it's living in a viscous fluid. Okay. For now, let's assume that the wall below is rigid, no deformability. So I move like that. I have a symmetry. Front and the back are symmetric because it's a sphere. Okay. And the Stokes equation, no inertia, are really time reversal symmetric. Okay. So for those reasons, you can demonstrate that the pressure field must keep some symmetry. And actually, it is there. You can compute it analytically. It's positive at the front because you have to make the current lines go inside the gap, and it's negative at the back because you repel those lines. But the novelty or the news here is that it's anti-symmetric. The same feature at the front and at the back, typically, apart from time reversal. So if you integrate that pressure field, summing all the little forces acting on the particle, you get zero. There is no normal force exerted on the particle. All right, but if you break the symmetry somehow, the story will change. And the soft material is able to do that. If I push at the front with a positive pressure, I will create a dip in the substrate. And if I pull with negative pressure, I will create a bump. And so I immediately kill the geometry of the symmetry of the geometry of my probe. Immediately, you can realize that there is no reason for any symmetry in the solution, the pressure field. In fact, you can compute it analytically with a linear elastic theory and Stokes hydrodynamics, and you get that curve. If you integrate that curve, there is a force pointing in the upward direction. So you move an object near a soft wall that is deformable, it generates a force, a Magnus-like, a lift force. We know that. All right, and so there is a key ingredient here, which is associated with the fact that the substrate does deform below. So we can actually see that with the fluorescent particle. You see when the cylinder is passing by, you see that the wall is deformed on the wall. You can average your Gaussian laser signal, and you can find actually that it's even pretty much a good qualitative shape, or quantitative if you do. No. Not with the current setup, but this is a very nice suggestion. Yes. Especially if we, for a cylinder, I would say it's perhaps not the thing we would like to do, but with a sphere, that's interesting because you will have a gradient of deformation in the transverse direction. So that's a very nice suggestion. Yes. Okay, so what is the feature behind this steady sliding? You have that particle which is moving down, let's say at constant velocity and constant gap thickness. Okay, and so we would like to estimate that velocity to compare it to experimental data. So you have two things. On the normal direction to the wall, there is a force balance. Okay, so gravity is pushing you towards the wall with some angle, and the lift force I just told you about is forbidding that situation. Okay, so the balance of the two is the following. So the gravity is simply the density or reduced density, gravity and the size. We are dealing with an infinite cylinder, so it's a force per unit length. Okay, so it's R squared. And the lift force, I told you before, it was a second order effect. At first order, there is no force when the wall is rigid. And if I correct by small deformation of the wall, then it becomes asymmetric. Okay, so it's an effect that goes with V squared and eta squared. That's why you have the viscosity squared and the velocity squared. It also goes like 1 over the deformation, the shear modulus, mu. Okay, the Young modulus if you want. Apart, yeah, that's a very good question, but suggestion. But in fact, there is a saturation of the effect for super compliant materials, and we can see that. So there is a tendency, which is the one I showed you, but this calculation was actually made in a perturbative manner at linear order in kappa. If you now start to have strong, so H the gap or H the thickness of both. So everything is valid in the situation where the gap thickness, it's in the lubrication framework. So the gap thickness and the deformability should both be small compared to the horizontal sizes, say the radius of the particle. That's the validity here. So this is the asymptotic theory for near contact motion. Okay? You need to be close. We can refine that to non-lubricated situations, and you will still have lift forces. All right, so this balance provides me a first relation. So then there are other length scales there. Those are pure geometric effects, and I don't want to enter into the detail. But just by balancing those two forces, you believe me that I have a first connection between deformability, gap thickness, let's say, of fluid and velocity. I need another one. So I will now look at the transverse direction. And in the transverse direction, you have steady motion. So now it's a power balance you want to do. Gravity is pushing you down the slope, but you have friction in the contact, viscous friction in the gap here. So you will just dissipate viscously your energy. Gravity has the same shape as before with a sign now. And viscous forces, you can take a Landau stress for hydrodynamics and integrate it as a pressure. So it's eta v squared, the gradient of velocity squared, integrated over the volume, and you get that prefactor. All right, combining those with the previous law and not looking too much at the details, it's pretty clear that I get an expression for the velocity as a function of all the parameters of the problem. It's a power law in particular. All right, we can test that with experiments. And this is the experimental velocity value for the cylinder versus the theoretical prediction, normalized by some free-fall unit to make it dimensionless. Here, we tested two types of materials. So an elastomer, PDMS, which is pretty stiff, and a polyacrylamide, which is more gel and which is softer, down to the kilopascal range. The parameters are varied. So the thickness of the substrate itself is varied. You see between 0.1 and 2 millimeters. That's the thickness of the material. The modulus of that material is varied by cross-linking density. The viscosity is changed with the other fluids as well. Thanks. Can you hear me well now on Zoom? Is there a mute? Can you tell me if it's better? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Now we should be okay. All right. So let me go back to the future. Here. So I was trying to forget about the work I presented you in our group, but more tell you what happens in the community about those ideas. I suggest that all the people in Zoom come in the room. Okay. Can you hear me now? Oscillates. Perhaps I'm doing some bad motion with my. Put it in. It's better. I just continue, and I'm sorry for everyone here. Let me hide that floating panel again. All right. So I was telling you that in fact they are able to measure a kind of friction stress that is somehow starting to reduce at large driving velocities, and they attribute that to a sudden separation of the two surfaces by qualitatively some elastohydrodynamic coupling. So they have the idea, in fact, of this lift force. It's written at the end of the articles, but I think it's there. Why it is interesting? Well, it seems that by carefully designing the surfaces of your engines or your joints, by putting some artificial polyelectrolyte layer, in this case, you are able to really modify the frictional property of your contact and apply this lift force ID. So I think it's interesting for that aspect. It's also interesting for robotics. People have studied that, but now patterning the soft substrate. So you can have a certain wavelength with a certain modulus, and then you deposit a flat layer by spin coating on top of that, and you have another modulus and another thickness. And by carefully choosing the ratio, so this wavelength, for instance, and the thickness, or the ratio of moduli, you can optimize the friction properties, either the hysteretic cycle or also the friction coefficient itself. You can make it big or small depending on what you want to do with your robotic finger. So there was a fancy paper recently on that. If you go down in scale and think about nanorheology now, so coming back more to physics there is a very nice related work by the team of Elisabeth Charlet. It's a pioneering work. Similarly, it has been explored by Joël Fréchette in the US. So what they do here is to move normally colloidal probe or SFA near a soft wall in a viscous flow, same kind of system as before. And what they realized rapidly that when they try to measure the viscosity of the confined liquid, to measure liquids in confinement, rapidly they started to see some elastic-like response of their fluid. In fact, it was not the fluid, it was the boundary nearby. So they used that idea to now measure the elasticity of some elastomers. You can deposit a layer, and without contact, just by gently oscillating nearby, you can measure elastic properties, which is very interesting. There is no contact, so no adhesion, no damage. to your system if you compare to JKR tests that are done in industry. What I find very interesting as well is that you could first use that to measure properties for biological materials or fragile nanoscale materials. But also, if you remember about the slip force that I told you about, it's more in this mode. So it's a transverse mode. And I told you it's quadratic in the velocity. So if you excite at a certain frequency and that the response is quadratic, you generate harmonics at 2 omega. Okay. In contrast to this mode, which is actually answering linearly with omega, so you have a pollution of the main resonance frequency. Whereas in the spectrum, you have nothing at 2 omega. So there might be a way to measure precisely things thanks to that peculiar feature. All right, let me move on. There is, to me, something that opened a lot of ideas in my research. It's a work by the group of Lionel Bureau from Grenoble. There, what they do is basically they take this idea of heat force, but put it down to the microscale and in biological context. So what they do is they take a microfluidic chamber, it's a channel with a difference of pressure at the entrance and at the output, and they put a microparticle inside. It's a solid one, it's a bed which is made of glass, and they push that particle in the channel. And the channel has been preliminarily decorated with a brush, which is a soft material, and which is here a biomimetic brush. It's made of hyaluronic acid, which is everywhere in the blood and also in the cartilage. Okay? And what they see, basically, if they increase the driving, let's say the difference of pressure or the shear rate, the particle separates from the wall. Okay? And they can model their data with a theory which is based on the elastohydrodynamic lift force I told you about. Okay, so the lift force is present at microscale and in biology, apparently, or biomimetic world. There was another very interesting work at the macroscale this time, but with slenderness ingredient. Now it's a group of Howard Stone that take a flag or a membrane and they pull on it. So by pulling on the membrane, you can tune the effective compliance in the normal direction. Okay? If you take about a balloon and if you just tense it very large, it's very stiff in this direction. If it's not tense, you have a very soft mode. Okay, and so by looking at the free fall of a particle nearby this membrane, they could see that the particle was escaping from the wall with a certain drift velocity that was really related to the lift force. Okay, so why is it interesting? Well, because biology is full of membranes and slender objects. So I think the lift force will be even magnified in biological context. All right, and so far everything was done. It's okay. Don't touch anything anymore. So far, those were only indirect proof of the existence of the lift force, either by a trajectory in a microfluidic chamber or a cylinder in an aquarium and so on. So it's not a proof of the existence of a force. What we've done recently is to measure the force using an AFM directly, and also we did that down to the nanoscale. So actually, this force is really present at small scales. So the idea is to take an AFM. It's a colloidal probe AFM. So you attach a big sphere micrometric to the cantilever, and either you oscillate the sphere or like that, or you oscillate the substrate, which is equivalent if there is no inertia in the problem. And so what you do, we really do that, and we place a soft layer on the substrate and measure the force exerted normally to the particle. Okay? And what we see, so here are two signals. First of all, a reference case without soft materials, and you see no force, as expected. And if you take a PDMS, which is a thick one, incompressible one, you see that there is the black curve here, so there is a normal force that is starting to apply on the particle. You can plug that in log-log. The first feature is that asymptotically you get an exponent, -5. And also at small scale, you have a saturation, which is related to your question. Okay? At small scale, the effect stops. And you cannot win forever. Okay? Due to non-linearities, probably we can discuss that later. And this exponent, actually, we can compute it. We can use Stokes hydrodynamics and linear elastic theory, combine them in a very asymptotic region where you are very close to the wall. And you can, and actually, this is what this is one of our students who is very brilliant, who was able to calculate all the dependencies, and in particular, the prefactor, which is a numerical one. And this fits perfectly well the data. We can, I don't show it here, but we can vary the viscosity, the velocity, the modulus, the sizes, and everything. All the power laws are checked, okay, in detail. But there are open questions for the saturation regime in particular. All right, so now, to me, it's very exciting because it seems that nanoscale objects will experience, this force is present at small scales in biological context, I told you, but also at the nanoscale. So why a protein would not feel that force, for instance. Think about a protein, a nanometric object, which is moving either spontaneously by thermal fluctuations or dynamically because it's pushed by some osmotic pressure or whatever. It can move near a membrane, and perhaps it can generate those modes in the membrane. And so the diffusion properties and the motion of that object might be completely altered by those effects. We don't know. It's very putative what I'm telling you today, but I'm just trying to say that perhaps this should be revisited in the context of biological systems. And so the take-home message I would like to convey here is that despite the fact that you are dealing with low Reynolds number flows, 0 Reynolds actually here, you still have exciting features, inertial-like features, because you put soft boundaries around. And so that's a general trend, and that allows you to have a large amount of interesting solutions here. And that is why I've juxtaposed those two guys. I mean, you could dream of playing tennis with a cell. Apart from the joke, it means that you could really direct or understand the motion of biological objects thanks to those elastohydrodynamic properties. All right, so what could we do next? Well, there are plenty of things we could explore. Other effects, I told you about the boomerang or the effet retro. We could check that. There are enhanced sedimentation properties associated to softness. We could design other ways of breaking the symmetry. There is one which is obvious. It was proposed by Reynolds. You simply have a shape that is not symmetric, so it will lift off if you move it. That's just by construction. But you could have Janus colloids, for instance, that are half coated with some, let's say, large slip lengths chemistry, and the other part is a standard small slip length. And this, we have studied that, and it's shown to also exhibit the same kind of strange motions or large zoology of motion. We can add charges in the problem. Electroviscous effects are known, but we can couple electro and elastoviscous effect. We have elasticity also in surfactant systems, Gibbs elasticity. And so this might also be responding to the pressure outside. So you might have lift with surfactants and many more. Interestingly, I think also we could even dream of measuring the rheology of a material without touching it, but in air, with a very small viscosity environment. Of course, the effect is in eta squared, so you need to be very close, you need to be very precise. But what if the resolution was there, the averaging was sufficient, so that you could really just let a probe oscillate randomly near a substrate and just collect the data, the spectrum, and perhaps you get information about the material. I'm interested also in multiple object systems, so you can put several particles, and if one particle moves, well, it deforms the wall nearby, which might affect the neighbor. So you have Chereau-like effect, but without contact. Okay, so you might generate effective Hamiltonians or interaction, or however you want to call them. You can think about other types of elasticity. Capillarity is a response to stiffness as well. So you could revisit capillarity of soft solids with deformable gels, and perhaps revisit some controversies. The interest here is that you can really measure the surface tension of one single interface. It's not a triple phase contact line. So that's perhaps interesting for those controversies. You could put timescales in the soft materials. Okay, there are plenty of things there. We are working with Oliver Bäumchen in Germany on Chlamydomonas. Perhaps it's an idea, but perhaps also an algae that is swimming near a liquid-like boundary might be able to be repelled from that boundary, feeling some elasto-active coupling, etc. And finally, we could play with the shape. So instead of having sphere, you can just completely change the shape. So those are just really recent videos with no explanation behind. But you could, for instance, think about the smart design of coatings of skis, or even what happens to the ice when it's melting. Perhaps due to the friction, you are creating a layer of liquid below. That's pretty sure. But down, further down in the soil, then it's more and more solid and elastic-like. So perhaps there are those kind of effects. I don't know at all. We have strange features, like the particle is back spinning. And it's reproducible. We don't understand why. And we see sometimes some oscillations. So this is a very bad video, sorry, but it's oscillating. And so perhaps we could use that type of system to really re-understand the oscillatory motion I was describing before. Okay, let me stop here and tell you a bit who did the work. So actually, it's a large number of persons. So we initiated the discussion with Mar when I was visiting him in 2014. and we did the harmonic oscillator-like model. And then rapidly, we discussed with Baudouin Saint-Yves, who created the first microscopic experiment with the cylinder with the help of Theo Jules. So they were really the person doing the experiments there. Afterwards, we discussed with Howard Stone, and the idea came, not study the lift force, but perhaps the emergence of a torque. There is also a spontaneous torque. Actually, the particle is spontaneously generating the rotation, which is interesting. So Bargav was the person doing that a lot in their lab. And at LOMA, the measurement with atomic force microscopy experiments were made by Abdelhamid Mani's team, and in particular, Zai-Sheng, who was the PhD student doing that, who is now a postdoc with us. And the theory was led by Vincent Bertin, who was a PhD student with Eddie Raphael and myself. And with all that, I would like to thank you, and I would be very happy to get your ideas or suggestions. Thanks.